A ruthless judge, a wrongfully accused girl, and a shocking truth that will change everything. What happens when the man who sentenced her realizes her father is his boss? Stay tuned, because this story is about to take an unexpected turn. The streets of New Orleans were quiet that evening, the humid air clinging to every surface as the city's neon lights flickered against the wet pavement. 17-year-old Zora Haley pulled her hoodie closer around her face as she stepped out of the small convenience store, gripping a bottle of water and a bag of chips in her hands. It had been a long day, early morning classes, a draining shift at the local cafe, and now, a walk home in the dark. The rain had started without warning, turning the warm night into a damp, uncomfortable trek. She quickened her pace, eager to reach the bus stop a few blocks away. But as she rounded the corner, red and blue lights exploded in her vision, bouncing off the brick walls of the alley. Freeze! Hands up! Get on your knees! The command was sharp, unforgiving. Zora barely had time to process the sudden turn of events before two officers emerged from a police cruiser, their flashlights blinding her. Her breath hitched, confusion knotting in her stomach. What? I said down. Now, one of the officers barked. She hesitated, panic rising in her chest. I didn't do anything, she stammered, glancing from one officer to the other. The taller cop, a stocky man with a weathered face, stepped forward and grabbed her by the wrist, yanking her forward. What do we have here? Another little thief out past curfew, he muttered, his grip tightening. Zora shook her head frantically. No. I paid for this. Look, she started to dig into her hoodie pocket for the receipt, but before she could pull it out, the second officer, a younger man with sharp eyes, shoved her forward. Yeah. That's what they all say, he muttered. Let's go. Zora's heart pounded in her ears as they forced her against the hood of the car, her face pressed into the cool metal. The sound of rustling paper filled the air as one officer checked her pockets. Look at that. She's got a receipt, he said with mock surprise. For a moment, relief washed over her. But then the older cop scoffed. So what? Bet she lifted something else. These kids are getting real creative. Zora's pulse quickened. No, you don't understand. I didn't steal anything. They weren't listening. They never did. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Cold metal tightened around her wrists. The back seat of the police car smelled like sweat and regret. As they drove, the officers laughed about their night, ignoring her completely. When they arrived at the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow on the holding cells. Zora was led to a desk where a tired-looking officer barely glanced at her before writing up her charges. Shoplifting, huh? He mumbled, stamping the papers. Another one for Judge Blake. Zora swallowed hard. Judge Blake. She had heard the name before. A man known for his harsh sentences, his disregard for anyone who didn't fit his idea of a good citizen. Her hands trembled as they led her to a cold metal bench inside a holding cell. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was something worse. The courtroom was ice cold, the air stiff with authority and indifference. The harsh fluorescent lights illuminated every nervous face in the room, but none stood out more than Zora Haley, sitting rigidly at the defendant's table. Her hands were cuffed, the metal digging into her skin as she clenched her fists in her lap. She had barely slept. The night in the holding cell had been a blur of muffled sobs, distant shouts, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. She had pleaded with the officers, begged them to check the store's security footage, to talk to the cashier, anything. But her words had been swallowed by the deafening silence of a system that had already decided her fate. And now, she was here. The heavy door at the front of the courtroom swung open, and in walked Judge Harvey Blake. He was a tall, imposing man with silver hair neatly combed back, deep lines etched into his pale, stern face. His black robe flowed around him as he took his seat at the bench, his eyes scanning the room with the detachment of a man who had seen it all before. Zora swallowed hard. She had never seen him in person, but she had heard the stories. A judge who ruled with an iron fist. A man who handed out punishments like a machine, never bothering to look deeper. Docket number 4268. State of Louisiana versus Zora Haley, charged with theft. The clerk's voice rang through the courtroom. Judge Blake barely glanced at the papers in front of him before settling his gaze on Zora. His eyes were cold, assessing. Miss Haley, you stand accused of shoplifting. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Zora's mouth was dry, her heart beat a frantic drum against her ribs. I didn't do it, Your Honor. I paid for everything. The receipt was in my pocket when they arrested me. The judge raised an eyebrow but remained unmoved. And yet, here you are. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stay calm. Please, Your Honor. The store has cameras. If you just look at the footage. Blake exhaled sharply, clearly uninterested. Miss Haley, do you have a lawyer? Her stomach twisted. She had barely been given a chance to call her father before they had thrown her into the holding cell. And now, sitting here, she was alone. She shook her head. Blake leaned back in his chair, tapping a finger against the polished wood of his desk. Shoplifting might seem like a small crime to you, but to this city, it's a plague. Young people making reckless choices, thinking they can get away with anything. This court has no tolerance for theft, no matter how small. But I didn't. His gavel slammed against the wood, silencing her. Enough. His voice was final, clipped. He turned to the prosecutor. Any prior offenses? None, Your Honor. First-time offender. For a moment, a flicker of hope sparked in Zora's chest. Maybe he would let her off with a warning. Maybe he would. 3 months in Oak Ridge Juvenile Detention Center. No bail. The words hit her like a blow to the stomach. Zora's breath hitched. Wait, what? She could hear gasps from a few people in the room. Even the prosecutor looked slightly surprised at the severity of the ruling. Blake didn't waver. Next case. Zora's world tilted. Before she could fully process what had happened, a bailiff was already grabbing her arm, yanking her to her feet. No, please. This is a mistake. I didn't steal anything. Her voice cracked, but the judge was already moving on, flipping through the next case file like she had never existed. The cold steel of the handcuffs pressed harder against her wrists as she was dragged toward the exit. Everything inside her screamed that this wasn't real. But the sound of the heavy courtroom doors slamming shut behind her told her otherwise. The bus ride to Oak Ridge Juvenile Detention Center was long, silent, and suffocating. Zora sat in the back, wrists cuffed, ankles shackled, the cold metal pressing against her skin. She stared out of the window, watching as the city lights faded behind her, swallowed by the darkness of the countryside. It felt like she was being taken to another world, one where she no longer existed beyond the label of criminal. Her thoughts raced, trying to make sense of how everything had spiraled so quickly. Just 2 nights ago, she had been walking home, thinking about her math test and her paycheck. Now, she was being sent to a juvenile facility for a crime she didn't commit. The officers in the front of the bus didn't speak much, only exchanging a few bored comments about their shifts and weekend plans. To them, she was just another case. Another number in the system. When the gates of Oak Ridge loomed ahead, her stomach twisted. The facility was massive, surrounded by high concrete walls topped with barbed wire. The dull, gray buildings looked lifeless, their small, reinforced windows like empty eyes staring into nothing. As soon as the bus stopped, the officers stepped out first, then ordered the detainees to follow. Zora hesitated for just a second too long, and one of them gave her a rough nudge forward. Move it. This ain't a resort. She bit her lip to keep from snapping back. It wouldn't help. Nothing would. Inside, the intake process was brutal. First, they took her fingerprints. Then, a strip search. She had never felt more exposed, more humiliated. The guards barked orders at her like she was less than human. Arms up. Turn around. Squat. Cough. She did as she was told, her face burning with shame. When it was over, they threw a rough, faded uniform at her, an oversized beige jumpsuit that smelled like disinfectant and sweat. Finally, she was led to processing, where a woman with tired eyes and a clipboard read off the rules in a monotone voice. No talking in the halls. No fighting. No contraband. You eat when we tell you to eat, sleep when we tell you to sleep. Step out of line, and you'll find yourself in solitary. Solitary. Zora had heard stories about places like this. She wasn't ready to become one of them. The dormitory was a long, echoing room filled with rows of metal bunk beds. The air was thick with an unidentifiable mix of sweat, mildew, and disinfectant. Girls sat on their beds, some talking in hushed voices, others staring at nothing. The guard shoved her forward. This is you. Zora looked at the bottom bunk she had been assigned. A thin, stained mattress, a single gray sheet. No pillows. No comfort. She sank onto the bed, gripping the edge of the mattress, feeling the weight of her new reality crush her chest. She wasn't sure how long she sat there before she heard a voice. First time. Zora glanced up. A girl with deep brown skin and sharp eyes was sitting on the bunk across from her, arms crossed. She looked like she had been here a long time. Zora nodded slowly. The girl sighed. Yeah. You look like a first-timer. She paused, then added, I'm Rebecca. Zora hesitated before answering. Zora. Rebecca smirked. Don't let them break you, Zora. Zora didn't answer. She wasn't sure how much of her was even left to break. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the facility, the distant echoes of footsteps, whispered conversations, occasional muffled cries. She felt trapped. Not just behind the walls of this place, but inside the nightmare that had become her life. But deep down, buried under the fear, under the exhaustion, something else flickered. A spark. A need for justice. She just didn't know how to fight for it yet. The air inside Haley and Associates law firm was always crisp, carrying the faint scent of leather-bound books and fresh coffee. The sound of ringing phones, clicking keyboards, and hushed conversations between attorneys and their assistants filled the space. It was a well-oiled machine, a place where the most powerful legal minds worked tirelessly to ensure justice for their high-profile clients. At the heart of it all sat Randolph Haley, one of the most respected defense attorneys in the country. He had built his reputation on an unshakable commitment to justice, winning cases that other lawyers wouldn't even dare to take. But today, he wasn't focused on a case. Today, he was reading the police report on his own daughter. His grip on the paper tightened as he scanned the words again, his mind struggling to process them. Defendant, Zora Haley. Age, 17. Charges, shoplifting. Sentence, 3 months in Oak Ridge Juvenile Detention Center. Randolph clenched his jaw, his usually calm demeanor cracking as an icy rage settled in his chest. Sir. I just found out this morning. I thought you should see it right away, stammered Elliot, one of his junior associates, shifting nervously in the doorway. Randolph looked up, his dark eyes burning with a controlled fury. Who was the judge? He asked, his voice dangerously low. Elliot swallowed hard and glanced at his notes. Harvey Blake, sir. The name sent a jolt of recognition through Randolph's body. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. Harvey Blake. Randolph had known him for years. Blake had built his career on being tough on crime, taking a no-mercy approach that disproportionately affected people like Zora, young black kids caught up in a system that saw them as criminals before it saw them as human beings. And now, that same man had thrown his daughter into a detention center without so much as considering the evidence. Randolph's pulse pounded in his ears. He had fought for countless wrongfully accused clients. He had defended the innocent. And yet, when it had come to his own child, the system had failed her just as easily as it had failed so many others. "Get my car ready," he ordered, his voice like steel. "I'm going to see Judge Blake. Now." The New Orleans courthouse was a grand, towering building made of limestone, its high ceilings and marble floors designed to intimidate. Randolph had walked these halls hundreds of times, but today, there was no courtroom battle. This was personal. He stormed through the corridors, his presence alone parting the crowd. When he reached Judge Harvey Blake's chambers, he didn't knock. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Judge Blake sat at his desk, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose as he flipped through legal documents. He barely looked up. "Randolph," he said coolly, setting down his pen. "This is unexpected." Randolph shut the door behind him, his movements slow, deliberate. "You sent my daughter to Oak Ridge." Blake finally raised his gaze, his brows knitting together slightly. "Your daughter?" Randolph dropped the police report onto Blake's desk. "Zora Haley. 17 years old. Arrested for a crime she didn't commit. Sentenced to 3 months without even considering evidence. That's my daughter." For the first time, Blake's expression faltered. He picked up the report, his eyes scanning the name. When he finally looked back up, a shadow of discomfort crossed his face. I wasn't aware," he admitted. Randolph let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Of course, you weren't. Because you didn't care to be. You saw a black girl in cuffs and decided she was guilty. You didn't ask questions. You didn't check the security footage. You didn't even look at the receipt that was in her pocket." Blake straightened in his chair, his face hardening. "I followed standard procedure. There was probable cause." Randolph slammed his hands on the desk, making the judge flinch. "Don't feed me that bullshit, Harvey. You and I both know what kind of judge you are. You don't see individuals, you see statistics. And my daughter? She became another one of your easy convictions." Blake exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "What do you want, Randolph?" Randolph's voice was sharp as a blade. "I want my daughter out of that hellhole. I want her record wiped clean. And I want you to start answering for every damn kid you've thrown away without a second thought." Blake looked away, silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked its usual confidence. I'll arrange for a review." Randolph's eyes narrowed. "No, Harvey. You're going to fix this. Now. Before I make sure the entire city knows exactly what kind of justice you've been handing out." Judge Blake swallowed, realizing too late that he had made the wrong enemy. Zora sat in the cold cafeteria of Oak Ridge Juvenile Detention Center, absently stirring the spoon in her tray of grayish mashed potatoes. The smell of overcooked food and bleach lingered in the air, blending with the low murmurs of other girls eating in silence. It had been nearly a week since she arrived, but time felt warped in here, like each day stretched endlessly into the next. She had learned the unspoken rules quickly. Don't look weak. Don't trust anyone too easily. Don't cross the guards. Rebecca had been the only person willing to talk to her without an immediate air of hostility. Now, across the table, Rebecca leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Word is, someone's looking into your case." Zora's spoon stopped midair. "What? Who?" she whispered back, barely daring to hope. Rebecca shrugged. "Some big-shot lawyer, apparently. But if it's true, you better pray it's fast. Once you're in Oak Ridge, getting out ain't easy. Zora swallowed, her heart hammering in her chest. Could it be her dad? He had to know by now. But if he did, why wasn't she out yet? Before she could ask anything else, a guard's voice boomed through the cafeteria. Haley. She snapped her head up. A heavy-set guard with a clipboard scanned the room until his eyes landed on her. You got a visitor. Let's go. Zora shoved her tray away, standing up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. The girls around her muttered, some curious, some indifferent. Rebecca gave her a small nod. Good luck. Zora didn't answer. She was too focused on keeping her legs steady as she followed the guard out of the cafeteria, through the long, sterile hallways, and into a visitation room. Her breath hitched the moment she saw who was sitting at the metal table. Her father. Randolph Haley was not a man easily shaken. He was known for his unbreakable composure, his commanding presence in the courtroom. But as Zora stepped inside, she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before, rage. Not at her. At the system that had put her here. The guard locked the door behind her and stepped aside, watching from the corner of the room. Zora took a hesitant step forward. Dad. Randolph's expression softened just enough as he stood, taking her hands in his. I'm getting you out of here, baby. I swear it. Zora felt a rush of emotions, relief, anger, exhaustion, all crashing into her at once. How did this happen? They didn't even listen to me. They just, her voice broke, and she swallowed hard, forcing herself to hold it together. Randolph's jaw tightened. I know. And I also know who's responsible. Zora blinked. Who? Her father's grip on her hands tightened slightly. Judge Blake. Zora frowned. She had heard the name before, but she had never met him before her sentencing. What does that mean? She asked carefully. Randolph exhaled sharply, his rage barely contained. It means the man who threw you in here works under me. I oversee cases like yours, and yet, he didn't even consider the evidence. He sent you away without a second thought. Zora felt a cold chill crawl up her spine. He didn't even know I was your daughter, did he? Randolph's silence was answer enough. She swallowed, shaking her head in disbelief. So if I was just some other girl, this would have been my life now. No one would have come for me. Randolph's fists clenched. That's exactly why I'm going to make sure this never happens to anyone else again. But first, we get you home. A knock on the door interrupted them. The guard opened it slightly, and a female officer stepped inside. Mr. Haley, you need to come with me. Judge Blake has ordered an emergency review of your daughter's case. Randolph turned back to Zora, squeezing her hands one last time. It's happening. Stay strong. I'll be back soon. Zora nodded, swallowing past the lump in her throat. As her father walked away, she exhaled shakily. For the first time since she had been locked up, she allowed herself to believe that this nightmare might actually end. Zora sat on the stiff mattress in her cell, her back pressed against the cold concrete wall. The fluorescent light above flickered every few minutes, casting brief shadows across the tiny space. She had been replaying her father's words in her head over and over again. It's happening. Stay strong. Her heart pounded with restless energy. What if something went wrong? What if Judge Blake found some excuse to keep her here? She had seen it happen before, girls who thought they had a way out, only to be told there had been a delay or technical issue that kept them locked up for months longer than their sentence. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Zora sat up, her muscles tense as she heard the jangle of keys and the low murmur of guards. Then, her name was called. Haley. On your feet. Let's go. She scrambled up, her pulse racing. She forced herself to take steady steps as she followed the guard out of the cell, past rows of other girls watching in silence. Some looked hopeful, as if they wanted to believe one of them had actually gotten lucky. Others looked indifferent, like they had already convinced themselves that escape was impossible. She kept her head up as she was led through the long corridors, past the common rooms, past the security doors. Then she saw it. The courtroom. Her breath hitched. It wasn't the same one where she had been sentenced. This room was smaller, more private. There was no audience, no jury, just a judge's bench, a few chairs, and the heavy weight of what was about to happen. Her father was already there, standing tall and unshakable. Across from him, Judge Harvey Blake sat at his bench, his hands folded in front of him. His expression was unreadable, but there was something different in his posture. A stiffness that hadn't been there before. Zora could feel the tension crackling in the air. Randolph turned as soon as she stepped inside, his eyes softening for just a moment before his professional mask fell back into place. "Your Honor, let's not waste any time. The evidence proving my daughter's innocence has been presented. We have the security footage, the receipt from the store, and the cashier's statement confirming she paid for the items. The arrest was not only unjust, it was negligent. There is no legal reason for my daughter to remain in custody." Judge Blake's jaw tightened, his gaze flickering toward Zora for the briefest moment before returning to Randolph. "I have reviewed the evidence," Blake said, his voice slower than usual. "And I must acknowledge that mistakes were made." Mistakes. Zora wanted to laugh. That was the word he chose. Mistakes. She had been ripped from her life, locked up, treated like a criminal, all because a judge couldn't be bothered to look at the facts. And now, he was acting as if it had just been an accident. Randolph took a step forward, his expression unreadable. "Let's be clear, Your Honor. This wasn't just a mistake. This was negligence. Bias. A rush to judgment that nearly destroyed a young girl's future. And let's not pretend my daughter was the first person this happened to." A flicker of something, guilt, maybe, crossed Blake's face. But it was gone just as quickly. He cleared his throat. "Regardless, based on the new evidence, I am overturning the previous sentence. The charges against Miss Haley will be dropped immediately, and her record will be expunged." Zora exhaled sharply, hardly believing the words. Randolph nodded, his face giving nothing away. "That's a start." Blake straightened in his seat. "You'll need to sign the release forms, but she's free to go." For the first time since this nightmare had started, Zora felt the suffocating weight lift off her chest. She was getting out. She was going home. But as she looked at Judge Blake, watching him shuffle papers and avoid her gaze, she realized something. She wasn't just walking away from this. She was walking away knowing that the system wasn't broken by accident. It was broken by design. And she had been one of the lucky few who had someone fighting for her. But what about the others? What about the girls she had left behind in Oak Ridge? The ones who didn't have powerful fathers. The ones who were trapped because no one had come looking for them. Her hands clenched into fists. She was getting out today. But she wasn't done fighting yet. The doors of Oak Ridge Juvenile Detention Center slammed shut behind Zora as she stepped outside, inhaling her first breath of freedom in weeks. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the parking lot, a warmth she hadn't felt in what seemed like a lifetime. The open sky above her, the sounds of passing cars in the distance, everything felt surreal. Her father stood beside her, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "Let's go home, baby." Zora wanted to nod, to climb into the sleek black car waiting for them, to disappear into the comfort of her own bed. But as she turned back for one last look at the facility, she saw the faces behind the barbed wire fence. Girls just like her. Girls who weren't walking out today. Her stomach twisted. Rebecca was one of them. She had been standing near the edge of the yard, watching silently as Zora was led out. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and Zora saw it, the flicker of relief for her, but also the deep, resigned acceptance. Zora knew that look. Rebecca wasn't expecting anyone to come for her. She wasn't the only one. Randolph opened the car door, waiting for her to get in. Zora hesitated. "Dad, what about them?" she asked softly, glancing back again. Her father followed her gaze, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he sighed. "I know, baby. I know." They drove in silence for a while, the streets of New Orleans passing by in a blur. Zora couldn't shake the feeling that, even though she was free, something inside her still felt trapped. Randolph finally broke the silence. "What happened to you? It never should have happened. And I won't let it happen again." Zora turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. "We can't just fix it for me, Dad. It's not just me. There are so many other girls in there, girls who don't have anyone fighting for them." Randolph nodded slowly. "I know. And that's why we're going to do something about it." Zora frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He glanced at her before returning his attention to the road. "I've already started digging into Judge Blake's record. Turns out, your case wasn't unique. He's been pushing harsh sentences for years, especially for kids of color. Most of them never had legal representation. Many were locked up without evidence strong enough to convict." Zora felt a cold rage settle in her chest. "And no one stopped him?" Randolph exhaled sharply. "No one questioned him. Until now." Zora sat up straighter. "What are we going to do?" Randolph smirked slightly, a rare moment of pride flickering in his gaze. "We're going to expose him. We're going to fight every case he wrongfully ruled on. And we're going to make sure this system stops treating kids like criminals before they even have a chance." Zora stared at him, the weight of those words settling into her bones. For the first time since she had walked into that courtroom weeks ago, she felt something new. Purpose. She wasn't just going to forget about this. She was going to fight back. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, activists, attorneys, and members of the public filled every available seat, their murmurs creating a low hum of anticipation. The air was thick with tension, the kind that only comes when justice is about to tip in one direction or the other. At the center of it all sat Judge Harvey Blake, his usually composed face now drawn tight with discomfort. Gone was the untouchable authority he had once carried. Today, he was not the one passing judgment. Today, he was the one being judged. Zora sat beside her father at the prosecution's table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She was no longer the scared girl in cuffs, no longer the wrongfully accused teenager standing before an indifferent system. She was a fighter now. Randolph Haley had spent the past 2 months meticulously tearing apart Blake's career, unearthing every case he had mishandled, every child he had unfairly sentenced, every decision he had made that disregarded justice in favor of bias. And now, it had led them here. A formal judicial misconduct hearing, one that could cost Judge Blake his career, his reputation, and, most importantly, his power. The lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Marissa Calloway, stood and addressed the room. After reviewing over a decade of Judge Harvey Blake's rulings, the committee has found a troubling pattern of excessive sentencing, particularly in cases involving Black and Latino minors. Many of these rulings lack substantial evidence, and in some cases, the accused were denied proper legal representation. A ripple of reaction moved through the courtroom. Blake shifted in his seat but remained silent. Calloway continued. This investigation was brought forth after the wrongful incarceration of Miss Zora Haley, whose case exposed the deeper corruption within Judge Blake's courtroom. Zora felt a surge of emotions hearing her name spoken in a courtroom again, but this time, she wasn't the one being condemned. She was the one seeking justice. Randolph stood next, his voice strong and unwavering. Judge Blake did not make a mistake. He made a choice. A choice to ignore evidence. A choice to favor conviction over truth. And because of those choices, children, have lost months, even years of their lives to a system that was supposed to protect them. Blake's attorney finally spoke, his voice controlled but desperate. My client has served this community for over 20 years. He has handled thousands of cases, making difficult decisions based on the law. To condemn him over a handful of cases. Randolph cut him off. A handful? We have over 100 cases where his rulings have been questioned. Some of those kids are still locked away because of him. Some have no families to fight for them. He stole their futures. And now, it's time he answers for it. Blake's face was red now. He finally spoke, his voice laced with frustration. I upheld the law. If you people want to twist this into some political witch hunt, then so be it. But I did my job. I followed protocol. And if some of these kids made poor choices, that's on them, not me. A wave of anger surged through the crowd. Someone shouted, "That's a lie." The judge overseeing the hearing banged the gavel for silence. Zora clenched her fists. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, for the chance to finally look this man in the eye and say the words she had been holding on to since that night in the courtroom. She stood. The room quieted. Blake turned his gaze toward her, and for the first time, he looked uneasy. Good. Zora took a deep breath and spoke. You don't even remember me, do you? She said, her voice steady. I was just another file to you. Another case number. You never even looked at me as a person. Blake didn't respond. You stole something from me, she continued. You stole my freedom. My safety. My belief that the system would protect me. Blake finally scoffed. I sentenced you based on the information provided. I didn't know you were the daughter of some high-profile attorney. If I had, maybe your case would have been handled differently. Zora's stomach twisted. And that's the problem, isn't it? She shot back. Because if I hadn't been his daughter, no one would have ever come for me. No one would have ever looked at the evidence. You would have let me rot in there, just like you've done to countless others. Blake opened his mouth to respond, but Calloway cut in. That's enough. She turned to the panel of judges overseeing the hearing. We have heard all we need to hear. A ruling will be issued shortly. Judge Blake, you are to remain suspended until further notice. The gavel slammed. The room erupted into murmurs, but Zora barely heard them. She turned to her father, who gave her a small, proud nod. She had done it. She had faced the man who had stolen her freedom, and she had taken it back. That evening, Zora sat in her father's office, staring out at the city skyline. Randolph placed a file on the desk beside her. These are the names of the kids still locked up because of Blake's rulings, he said. Zora exhaled. And we're going to help them, right? Randolph smiled. That's the plan. Zora nodded, a fire burning in her chest. She had started this journey as a victim. But now, she was something more. She was an advocate. And she was just getting started. This story is more than just a tale of injustice, it's a reflection of a reality that too many people face. Zora's journey represents the countless individuals who have been silenced, judged unfairly, and discarded by a system that was never built to protect them. But what makes her story powerful is not just the injustice, it's the fight. Zora didn't stay a victim. She didn't just escape and move on. She turned her pain into purpose. That's what makes her different. That's what makes her story matter. Her father's influence may have helped free her, but the real victory came when she chose to fight for those still trapped. Because true justice isn't about fixing one mistake, it's about making sure it never happens again. This is the kind of resilience we need in the world. The kind of courage that refuses to accept injustice as the norm. The kind of voice that turns whispers into movements. Zora Haley started as a girl no one listened to. She ended as a force no one could ignore.